Came out in 2001, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Post 9/11.
This film has nothing to do with airplanes.
No, it doesn't. Actually, no, pre 9/11.
Oh.
Release date July 20th, 2001. Damn, it was a different world.
Ladies and gentlemen, prepare for a cinematic odyssey through the 100 greatest films spanning from the roaring 1920s to the cutting-edge masterpieces of 2024. Carefully curated from the lovely people on Letterboxd. Two intrepid souls embark on a journey through a treasure trove of timeless classics and groundbreaking contemporary works, where each frame embodies the enduring magic of the silver screen. Grab your popcorn and join us on this epic expedition through a century of cinematic excellence, where every film promises to enchant, inspire, and leave an indelible mark on the soul. And now, for your listening pleasure, here are the LetterBros.
Welcome back, everybody, to LetterBros, where we let a wheel decide what we watch. I'm based off the top 100 movies of all time. As always, I am Felix, and I am joined by my buddy Parker. How we doing today, dude?
Doing great.
It's good to be back.
Yeah, welcome back stateside, buddy.
Yeah, I just got back from vacation. Parker has been holding down the LetterBros front while I have been gone, so thank
Barely.
you. Hey, man, it's something. Just to try and keep things fresh and do whatever. But he's been doing great, and I appreciate him.
I appreciate you, Felix. So much work goes into the social media side of things while we continue to grow, and you've been the Zenobia to my Yubaba in that case. So I thank
you. Yubaba?
Yeah.
What are you talking about?
I'm talking. It's a Spirited Away reference, bro.
We're talking
Oh God! Do
we
need to go rewatch this before we get into the episode?
Yeah, dude. Let's do a clock wipe. Ready? 3, 2, 1. All right, welcome back. So I just finished watching the movie right now. It was just a little 2-hour break while I was watching it. So
yeah,
but now I'm all caught up. I did catch that reference now. So now we're all set.
Good.
For this review. If you caught last episode, we spun the wheel and it gave us the 2001 Miyazaki classic from Studio Ghibli, Spirited Away. Very much considered the best Ghibli movie of all time. That's up to personal opinion. I personally like other Ghibli movies besides this one, but I mean, this one is a classic for a reason. It's got a lot. It's
my first Ghibli film and my first Miyazaki film as well.
And there are a couple on this list too. I think there's like 3.
So a good start. I've heard so much about Spirited Away. I've seen it before, had never gotten around to it. So thank you, Wheel, for providing us with our nutritious film dinner of Spirited Away. It was very filling.
It was. Yeah. And on theme for this movie.
Yes, indeed. So shall we dive right into it? We're going to try and we've been reviewing very long films, and as such, our episodes have been quite long as well, as we try and discuss all the ins and outs of each of these movies. We're hoping that you guys listening are watching along with us as we go on this cinematic journey. Nonetheless, we are going to try and keep it a little bit more concise for your listening pleasure to ensure that you can still go about the other things that you have planned in your day. But as always, thanks for listening along with us as we talk about these great movies.
Exactly. We just continue on with this journey that we have undertaken, watching 100 of the most diverse movies I've seen. Again, just going off of what we have trying to choose the lists that we wanted to dive into. I feel like this Letterboxd list has definitely given us a much wider net of films to dive into.
Certainly.
And I know that the other episodes have run pretty long because not only have they been long in length, but they have been packed with just a lot of different themes. So I'm very blessed that the wheel has given us a pretty easy film to watch.
It's no Love Exposure in terms of its plot.
It's not. It's
there's
Japanese,
still a lot to dive into. And I shall say as well, we have reached with this movie a benchmark in that we are now 10% of the way through this list.
Yes, sir. We finally have a top 10, which is great. But before we dive into that, let's dive into our 10th entry, where Parker will dive us in with his quick synopsis of the film.
Yeah, so if you haven't seen it, or if you have, bring you up to speed a little bit. But Spirited Away is a Studio Ghibli film directed by Hayao Miyazaki. As you said, it released in 2001, and it follows a young girl named Chihiro who is moving into a new house, and she and her family stumble upon this mysterious gate to what they believe is an abandoned theme park. It actually happens to be a mysterious spirit world that they stumble across, and her parents find this beautiful array of food, and as she's wandering around, they are absolutely gorging themselves and turn themselves into pigs due to their gluttony. So Chihiro must navigate this strange new realm, these strange new characters, work for a witch named Yubaba who runs a beautiful bathhouse in this spirit realm, find a way to save her parents, and return to the human world. That is a very brief synopsis of what is a very beautiful and intricate film. But essentially, throughout the course of the runtime, we are following Chihiro and trying to get her back into her normal and human world. If I may say, if I watched this movie as a child, I would have been fucking terrified.
Yeah.
Terrified. This
That
is
was
an
me.
animated movie, and I'm sure that there are tons of kids that would love it. There's some really creepy imagery. There is a lot of it being a Japanese spirit film. There is some yokai relation, so the Japanese spirits and ghosts, and it would have freaked me out. There's definitely some unnerving imagery, and also the feeling of abandonment, especially in the beginning of the film, that Chihiro has, is difficult to watch and quite scary. As a child who's now in this brand new place, completely abandoned from her parents who have turned into pigs, it's quite horrifying and also very beautiful. So, what are your thoughts as someone who has seen this film prior to us watching it for this list? Upon rewatch, what are your general thoughts on this film, your general feelings? Do you still love it as much as you did when we had selected the film?
Oh yeah. I feel like I appreciate it a lot more. Again, it's been about maybe 5 or 6 years since I've rewatched it. I think I watched it when like HBO Max like first came out, and one of their selling points was they have like the whole Ghibli collection on HBO Max. And so, well, the first one I watched was my favorite, which is Howl's Moving Castle. And then after that, I watched Spirited Away because, it's such a big hit. It's Ghibli's, I believe, one of their most like popular and most profitable films, mainly because this featured a very heavy Disney cast. Disney was in charge of a lot of the dubbing for a lot of Ghibli films, and this one in particular had about 4 notable names that I saw. I will preface this with saying that we both watched the same film, but we watched it. I watched the dub because that's what I'm familiar with, and that's what I have just watched and I'm comfortable with. And I mean, when you get a movie like Spirited Away after watching Scenes from a Marriage, Love Exposure, High and Low, Human Condition, I'm like, I just want to get to somewhere where I am familiar with what I am watching, and that is the dubbed version of Spirited Away. With this being Parker's first, not only first Ghibli film, but first time watching Spirited Away, he ended up watching the subbed version, so the Japanese audio version of this film. So while we talk about just each character, I'll go ahead and say the names of both voice actors for the English and the Japanese versions.
Spoiler, he does not do this, unfortunately, but I'll go ahead and put the names of the Japanese voice actors throughout the video. Sorry.
But for my point, so we have Chihiro, also known as Sen for story reasons, played by Davy Chase, who played Lilo in Lilo and Stitch. And funny enough, she also played Samara from The Ring.
Yeah.
Like the girl that comes out of the well. I didn't know that. Like she plays like the physical like body of Samara, which I thought was really cool. There's also notable voice actor who plays Haku is Jason Marsden. He's most notably known as the voice of Max Goof, so Goofy's son. And then Kamaji, the like spider dude who's like in charge of the furnace and whipping up like all of the, you know, spices and sweeteners for the bathhouses, is played by David Ogden Stiers, who's been in a lot of things, but most notably from that year also was also from Lilo and Stitch. He plays Jumba Jukiba, the big like fat alien dude. And Lynn, so like the like adult, kind of like temporary adult caretaker for Sen, is played by Susan Egan, who plays Megara in Hercules. So a lot of big names just from like that year alone. So Hercules had come out in
97.
Lilo and Stitch around 2000, 2001, 2002. So very Disney heavy, which I feel like had a lot of the American audience kind of hook more onto this film because there was a lot of familiar voices to attach to.
Certainly.
With this
And
film.
a notable, I forget his name, but a notable Pixar director also directed the dubbed version of Spirited Away. And Ghibli and Pixar do have that kind of working relationship in the sense that they have inspired one another as they've continued to create these beautiful movies. And they're two powerhouses in terms of animation, Pixar and Ghibli. And I'm excited to have finally dived into the Ghibli side of things because I've heard so much about Howl's Moving Castle, Spirited Away, My Neighbor Totoro, all of these movies that I've never seen but heard so much about. And I'm very picky. I guess you could say picky would be the word with animation. I don't typically just shoot for animated films. I'm a big live action guy. It's what I like. But when you do animation correctly and you do it right, and there's so much to look at, and there's still such a powerful story to be told, I still love it as much as any other movie. And I should mention, I believe this was the first foreign language film to win Best Animated Feature at the Oscars as well. So it did win an Oscar for Best Animated Picture.
Yeah. Became the first hand-drawn Japanese anime and non-English language animated film to win Best Animated Feature. And that director that you were looking at was Kirk Weiss, who had previously directed Beauty and the Beast, Hunchback of Notre Dame, and Atlantis: The Lost Empire. So a pretty stacked resume to then go and direct the English version of this very packed Miyazaki film. Like it's kind of cliche to say, but there would have been nobody better. There's not a company better that would have handled this than Disney, in my opinion. Just based off of other dubbed Miyazaki films that I have seen from Studio Ghibli, like they get the job done. Like there's some dubs that I could say that like aren't that great in retrospect, like specifically Howl's Moving Castle, but another thing that makes up for that translates into both movies, and I hope that you would agree, is the music in this movie. The music is iconic in this movie. It's just, the composer's name is mistaking me. Joe Hisaishi, and has had his stamp in pretty much like the main aspects of the music in Ghibli that people attach to. Especially Howl's Moving Castle. That music is just amazing, but there's a lot of those themes in here that just play very beautifully into the film. But I'll say we can just dive into just like our general like feelings about the film, what we thought was great, what we thought could have worked a little bit better. But I want to know, just based off of your first viewing of it, what did you think about Spirited Away?
So I think what I loved the most is, especially upon first watch, I have a feeling that this is one of those movies that you'll go back and wish that you could watch for the first time over and over again, because there's so much that's being explored, and there's such a beautiful, mysterious, and sometimes terrifying world that is being created right in front of your very eyes. So I loved getting to know the different spirits and the different characters as the movie progressed, because you see spirits such as No Face early on. And I recognized it just from pop culture and seeing people dressed as No Face, or seeing, I don't know, memes or just clips. And I was like, oh, that's that guy. What's going to happen in the movie with this spirit? A lot. That guy's crazy. And I really enjoyed the way that the story progresses and the way that Chihiro meets and adapts to the world around her. And it is a kind of a heartwarming film. As I said, it is also terrifying. Even as a 24-year-old, I was kind of scared watching this movie. But I think you really you're very attached to the music. I'd say I'm very attached to the visual aspect of the film, which I'm sure you are too. It just did a little bit more for me than the music did. And I agree with you that the music was perfect throughout the film and synced up perfectly with the story beats that we're seeing. And nothing against the score, but to look at the film and to watch the beautiful hand-drawn animation is really just such a pleasure. It feels like you're watching buried treasure. It literally does. It's something that's so magnificent that it's hard to fathom that not only did someone come up with this completely original story, but someone also literally took pen to paper and created this beautiful world that we're exploring alongside Chihiro. So I really enjoy the fact that you can empathize directly with Chihiro, someone who is not well versed in this spirit realm. You're exploring it alongside her. You're both learning these things at the same time. And I thought that there were a lot of incredible sequences in the bathhouse. I really enjoyed the stink monster or the stink spirit turning into the river dragon. That whole sequence I thought was very entertaining. I love the people that kind of connect themselves to Chihiro while also alienating themselves from her because she's human and this is not a human realm. I will say that there seem to be a lot of humans or human looking people in this film when humans seem to be an organism that is banished from the realm. There seem to be still a lot of humans there. So I'm not sure if they are human-esque and not truly human, or if they're humans like Haku and Chihiro that have wandered into the realm and eventually gotten stuck. That part of it confused me a little bit. But
And that's what I think was the case, because the whole point of, Haku trying to help Chihiro was to help her not get stuck in that realm.
Right.
Which I feel was the case for not only him, but also for Lin, who Lin is pretty much human. They're Haku turns into a dragon, but Lin is she's one of the caretakers in the bathhouse. I think in her case, she was a human that got stuck in that realm and is just kind of it is what it is. This is the hand that I've been dealt with, and I'm just going to have to continue to work here for forever. But I think she has that kind of working relationship with Haku, because I mean, when we first meet her, she's kind of treating Chihiro like shit. And then when they're alone, she's, kind of, building her up, being like, you did so well, you acted very well, let me know if you need anything. So kind of being a motherly figure towards her, being a friend towards Chihiro. Because I mean, to your point, this movie is very scary. And I mean, watching it as a kid,
I was not expecting it.
Which, funny enough, as a kid growing up, I was terrified of things like The Exorcist or Halloween or Friday the 13th, those big horror icons that you associate with horror films and horror imagery. But I could watch this movie or The Black Cauldron, let's say, a pretty terrifying Disney movie with absolutely no problem, and I'm like, oh yeah, this is fine. You watch Freddy Krueger, saying some silly shit, and I'm terrified of that. But then the Horned King is literally I want to steal that pig and tear your soul. And I'm like, yeah, this is fine. Or watching Spirited Away and seeing No Face, open his giant fucking mouth and just start devouring all this shit, and seeing all of these spirits, and it's fine. So I feel this movie kind of contributes to the kind of stuff that I like today. So it's funny that you mentioned that there's scary imagery even upon first watching it as, a 20-year-old.
See, to contrast your childhood preferences, so to speak, as a kid, put Michael Myers in front of me, I'm totally fine. But put on Watership Down, that little movie with the rabbits,
oh my God, dude.
and I'm fucking freaking out. So seeing Chihiro's parents turn into pigs at the beginning of this movie would have given me nightmares for days on end. I want to
I mean,
also
I'm not
say that
saying that I was like, oh yeah, that's cool. It still freaked me out watching her parents turn it. Even watching it this time, I was like, dude, like how they're still wearing the clothes and still like her dad still has that like haircut
Mhm.
as the pig. Like it's scary. It's scary shit, dude.
Something that I really want to give this movie props for is that for a movie that has so many characters and so many different creatures and spirits and designs, none of it felt wasted. They all felt as though they had their own distinct personality that was very well developed. So you have No Face, who has his very own story arc. You have Yubaba, of course, and the main characters, Haku, and they all, of course, have their own storyline. But then you look at the frog people, and they have their own very distinct personality. You look at the little coal spirits that are the soot that's carrying the coal into the furnace. They have their own little storyline, and they have their own characteristics. And they learn to love Chihiro and support her because she does nice things for them. You have the what was his name? The coal miner who's spinning his arms the whole time. He's got his own arc. He's got his own characteristics, and none of them ever feel flat. They never feel one-dimensional. They all feel as though they have their own personality and their own characteristics that are there and written in for a reason. So I really appreciated the fact that none of the movie felt flat. Every character felt that they were there for a reason. They all contributed to the story, and they all built together this very lived in and realistic feeling spiritual world. They were all there for a reason. They all had their distinct roles, and I really appreciated that about this film, because you can get movies that have a lot of characters that are epics that we've seen, for example, that don't spend enough time to give each of their characters their own characteristics. What makes them who they are? And this movie did that very well. You felt as though every spirit in the movie had, when being created, were created with care and were created with reason and were put into the film and into the script for a reason. So I think that's definitely a highlight of this film. It makes it highly rewatchable, and it's something I'll probably revisit going forward, because there's a lot that you can pick up on again. What would you say is the main overarching theme of this film? What is it that, what lessons, I guess you would say, do you take away from it? Because I'm struggling. I know that there's something there. I'm struggling really with pulling away what the lesson taught is here, though.
Yeah, of like how there's there's usually been like an overarching theme from all the movies that we've seen, whether it's like Lawrence of Arabia, like struggling with personal identity, or love exposure with it has basis of religion, it has basis of like sexuality. But this one, I kind of go into this movie just because I've seen it so many times that I'm watching it strictly just for like the character and the story. And I don't really kind of see like an overarching theme versus like, family and just the love that you have for your family. And Chihiro is thrown into a situation where it would be tough on any child, or any child, let alone any adult, to, kind of lose your parents, because at this point she doesn't think she's going to get her parents back, but she's going to do everything she can to try. That now she's thrown in with this guy that she's never met before, who's kind of throwing like all of these things at her to be like, this is what you need to do to help your parents. You need to do this, and this. You need to go down and meet this coal miner, ask him for a job. I don't care what he says. You need to push to have him give you a job. And I mean, he does make it very difficult. And I love the scene that kind of helps him to convince her to give her a job, when she's like picking up the pieces of coal for the little lint mites that are walking around. One of the little lint spiders is picking up a big piece of coal and it crushes him. So she tries to help him out. She picks up the coal. She walks it over to the furnace. She throws it in there. All the little lint spiders see this, and they proceed to then all let their piece of coal crush them to have her do the job for them, basically.
Right.
And this kind of, sets off the chain of events to where Kamaji is like, all right, like, what do you want? And this is when Lin comes in and offers to have her kind of be her apprentice and help her out around the bathhouse. But
yes,
also,
well, she goes to Yubaba first and asks Yubaba for this job. And
yeah,
and I want to say Yubaba is a really good villain in this film, because at certain points you're really not sure who is the antagonist of the film, because they all have their own genuine motivations. And of course, they're animated spirits that it's hard to relate to on a human level, but they still do an excellent job of giving each character their motivation and stringing you along trying to figure out who is it that Chihiro can trust. Because Lin even says, Haku works directly for Yubaba. You cannot trust him. And up until that point, Haku was the only person that we thought we could trust. And of course, it turns out that he is trustworthy and that they have this relationship from their past that Chihiro does not even remember at first.
And well, there's also there's a scene when Yubaba does give her the job after like her baby is crying or whatever, and she's like, fine, I'll give you the job. And Haku does come in and kind of just treats Chihiro like shit at first. Like he kind of acts like she's never met her in her entire life. And that's when you think like, oh, maybe and this was after Lin had given that line of like, he's not to be trusted. So this leaves it in your mind of like, can you actually trust Haku? But I mean, as the story progresses and, other events happen, like when she helps to save Haku's life, that does build that trust again. There's also other scenes in it where Haku comes back and helps out Chihiro a little bit more, but that there is that kind of aspect that leaves you like, can you really trust Haku if he's working directly with Yubaba? But later we find out it's not to his own choice that he is working for Yubaba. So,
and then I also think that a great story element that took place was the medicine, the little ball of medicine that Chihiro finds from the river monster, that she dreams of being able to turn her parents back into humans. And so she kind of knows internally that this little ball of moss, it looks like, will be able to cure her parents. And yet she still gives it to others that she encounters who need it. And that rids her of the opportunity to be able to give it to her parents in the future. So I thought that was a very powerful development on Chihiro's end, in which she knows that she's ridding herself of what she may believe to be the only cure for her parents for the benefit of the people around her at that moment. She gives half of it to No Face when he has eaten the entire bathhouse, essentially. And then she gives the other half to Haku and saves him when he has the curse placed on him from Yubaba's sister, Zenobia, who is one of my favorite characters.
After stealing her artifact,
And I've got to say, their quest to go visit Zenobia's house was one of my favorites too, because at this point, Yubaba's baby has been turned into a little hamster, and her apprentice bat lady has been turned into a little fly. And I absolutely loved every time that they would show the little fly carrying the little hamster, and then the fly gets on the hamster's back, and then Chihiro takes them and puts them on the shoulder. And it was such a fun little adventure that they took over to Zenobia's house. That
storyline was really cute. I love it.
In order to return her heirloom. And I really enjoyed the second half of this film a lot. I enjoyed the movie on the whole, but that little exploit was very entertaining in my mind, very fun to watch, and very endearing. This movie is very endearing, I will say, as horrifying as it can be.
And jumping to your point of the second act, it was just nice to get the scenery fleshed out a lot more, because upon first viewing, you're thinking you're going to spend the entire time in this bathhouse, which, I mean, there's a lot to see. Like, this bathhouse is ginormous. And there's a lot of different characters, like the radish demon, who I freaking love. He's a really kooky looking guy. But it's nice that we get that journey to Zeniba's house that really fleshes out the spirit world. And we get that whole journey, like with her traveling with No Face, like on the train, and the other two, like the fly and the mouse characters' interactions are really sweet. And I remember like watching this as a kid, that yes, they're sisters. Yes, they're twins. It freaked me out. Not in the sense of like I was scared, but I'm like, who is who? Because they both look exactly the same, dress pretty much exactly the same, are voiced by the same person, who is seasoned veteran Suzanne Pleshette, who I know from The Birds.
On the dubbed version,
Yes, on the English dub. But we get to see like Zeniba become like a grandmotherly figure. Like Chihiro even ends up calling her grandmother, which is, it's just a really sweet contrast versus Yubaba, who's like, everybody is treating Chihiro like shit pretty much except Haku and Lin. So to get that kind of, fun and loving like side of the cast towards Chihiro, who's going through a lot in her life right now, it kind of balances out like the freaky deaky nature of this movie.
And that's not given to you right up front, because at
No.
first Zenobia seems like an antagonist because she's killing Haku with her curse, because Haku has stolen her heirloom for Yubaba. So you have Haku, who objectively, after watching the full film, is in the category of good guy, yet he works directly for Yubaba, who is in the category of bad guy, and is being chased by Zenobia, who at that time you put in the category of bad guy, but then becomes a saint, basically, and keeps No Face there with her. And I really, really appreciated the fact that there was no set good and evil throughout the film. And everyone, again, has their own motivations. They have their own reasons. Some are driven by greed. Yes. Some are driven by charity. But at the end of the day, they are all their own characters. It never felt as though the movie was trying to place distinction upon each character as to whether or not they were good or bad, which I really liked, because that's how life is in the human world as well. So there's some parallels to draw. I'm excited to watch this again and see what else I can take away from it in terms of similarities between real life and this beautiful world that has been created. But I really enjoyed that motives were flexible and there was no set terms of good and bad, really, until the end.
And one note that I'll just say before we dive into our ratings, I'm just going back to the music, who, again, by Joe Hisaishi. You bring up Howl's Moving Castle. It's very sweeping. It's very like waltzy kind of music, but versus Spirited Away, I literally have a note on here that says, why did the music while Chihiro is eating her rice cake make me cry? Like literally just watching it and just listen, like she's just eating a rice cake, but the music that's accompanying it, like she's lost almost all hope, because now like she's kind of not being able to tell like which pig is her parents, and Haku's just like, you need to remember which pig are your parents, but here, eat this rice cake. But the music that's accompanying this while she's eating it and while she's crying, it's just so emotional. And a lot of the music in here, it's not very sweeping and big and orchestral. It's just a lot of like pianos.
Very
like
subtle.
I thought
it is very subtle.
It's very subtle. That it reminded me a lot of Breath of the Wild. The score there, it's pretty much piano all throughout until it's necessary to bring in an orchestra. So I thought it was just the subtlety of it is probably one of the most beautiful aspects of the film. The Studio Ghibli music, as we go through, it's going to blow you away every time. It's a given at this point. But with that, speaking of...
Before we dive into the ratings, do you have...
Yes.
Is there anything that you think is a negative about this film? Is there anything that rubs you the wrong way or you don't think quite hits the mark? And I know we'll discuss this a little bit in the ratings, and I don't particularly have anything ostensibly that is a negative, if I'm being honest. But I'm curious to hear your thoughts on... We've talked a lot about pros. I'd like to know if there's anything on the con side of things for you.
So there is one, and it's strictly from the dubbed version of this film, where, to all the credit of Davy Chase playing this, who, again, had played Lilo, I believe either the same year... I think it was the year after. I think Lilo and Stitch came out 2002. Whenever she's screaming and just being like, where are my parents? Where are my parents? Oh my God. I never wanted to just like poke my eardrums out every time this girl is screaming and yelling and hooting and hollering, which I don't know if it was the same in the Japanese version, but oh my God, Davy Chase, when she's screaming, is so annoying.
I want you to give me a job, please. I'm not leaving until you give me a job.
It's too much, dude. But like, I get it. You've lost like lost your parents, you're scared, but there's a better way to convey that besides just screaming, which that's how I knew it was Lilo. I'm like, this screaming sounds very familiar, and it literally just made me think of like the when she's like arguing with her sister in Lilo and Stitch, where she's like,
I'm already in my room.
like just oh my god, dude, it was just every time she was screaming, I felt like wanting to turn it off, but I was like, there's more to this. There's better things ahead, and I'm glad I did. But that's the
Okay.
only real fault that I have with the movie. I mean, everything else about it, when she's not yelling, Davy Chase is phenomenal in this movie, and besides that, portrays such a wide range of emotions through this film that's just it stands the test of time. But do you have any cons?
It's hard to say. I don't think this is necessarily a con per se, but I will note that the movie is very vignette style in the sense that it feels as though it's telling miniature stories along the way. And then there's one thin through line throughout the course of the runtime of Chihiro trying to get her parents back and leave. And little pieces from each vignette are taken and carried along for the duration of the plot. But I guess you could say some of it felt a little bit choppy, and it's hard to even fault the movie for this because I was highly entertained the whole time. But for example, the stink spirit, river spirit section of the movie is distinctly separate from then No Face coming in and starting to eat everybody. And then you have the plot of them going to Zenobia's house and Haku turning into a river spirit dragon. And it felt as though it was very cut and dry, the arcs that move along. Again, not really a con, just something I thought was interesting. It felt almost like an anthology in a sense that we were following very small stories that take place in this realm throughout the course of the plot, and only some of it was carried from storyline to storyline. Again, not a con. I really like that the movie dives right into it. You're 10 minutes in and her parents are already pigs and you're already immersed in this spirit world. So not necessarily a con, but a little note that I had in my mind when watching
And I
this.
mean, this is a pretty long animated film. Like
It's
usually
what,
you'll
2.5
get like
hours?
maybe an hour. Yeah, no, 2 hours and 5 minutes.
Oh, okay.
But
Yeah.
still pretty long. Like, I mean, your typical animated films are usually going to be like an hour and a half or so, and we'll get into that with the pacing. It's very quick until you get to these like little vignette moments, which I can arguably say that like, the river monster setup kind of shows off like what they do in the bathhouse and how everybody acts when there is somebody with like, actually, I wouldn't even say like distinct nobility because everybody just wants the river monster to go away.
Right. That would be more with No Face, who's producing this gold.
Yeah. But
Directly
I'd
out
say
of his
just
hand.
more of like how this bathhouse really works. Like it's teaching you a lot of things of like how do they get the water
Right.
into the bathhouse? Like,
Right.
but
I still enjoyed it. I still thought I actually think that was probably my favorite sequence of the whole film was the river, the stink monster coming in.
it is
I really
really
enjoyed
fun.
it. And
I
he's
like it a
bringing the
lot.
rain because he truly at heart is a river monster. So there's rain that accompanies him. Maybe his river clearly was polluted. He has all this trash. So I kind of liked that symbolism in a sense
There
that
you
the river
go.
spirit has become polluted with trash, like how
You
rivers in
found a
real life
theme.
are. Right. In that one sense. So there's
Yeah.
a lot of there are a lot of thematic elements to pull from this film in the little different featurettes that are displayed. And this movie is certainly not an anthology film. It is not. But
No, there is just one story.
right. But it felt as though there were distinct plot lines throughout the course of the overarching plot, which is just something that's interesting, something that I found to be interesting. Shall we?
Let's do it. All right. So, in terms of enjoyability and rewatchability, I mean, it just goes to show I've seen this movie probably 4 or 5 times throughout my life. So, it has very high, in my opinion, enjoyability and rewatchability. But with it not being my favorite Ghibli film, I didn't want to give it a perfect score because, I mean, if I'm in the mood for a Ghibli film, I will go watch Howl's Moving Castle. That's my favorite Ghibli film, but I still enjoy this movie for what it is. It's a classic for a reason, and there's definitely rewatchability in this movie. Like you
Certainly. I
will
mean, a 14 is a very high score. It was a very high score.
exactly. So what would you give it?
I give it a 13. I think that there's a lot to be gained from a rewatch of this film. And I actually think I would probably take more away from it on a second watch. Watching it for the first time is definitely an experience unlike any other because you have no idea where it's going. And the movie does a very good job of keeping you intrigued. There is actually quite a bit of suspense in this film as well, which kept my eyes just glued to the screen. I'll call out the scene where Chihiro's on the staircase for the first time, and it's so gripping and it's so daunting. The shot of her looking down as the train passes and she's at the top of this staircase with no railing, and every sequence was just so captivating, and I was curious what was going to happen and how it was going to affect the story moving forward. I had a really good time with it, and I definitely think that it's a movie that I'm going to revisit probably time and time again. It's not a drag to get through whatsoever. Story-wise,
yeah.
I think so. This is tough because, like I said, I didn't feel as though there was one particular value to be taken out of this film, but the story that was being told at the end of the day is a very simple plot. She's visited this spirit world. She's trying to get her parents back and leave, but it's the things that happen along the way and the way in which Chihiro becomes accustomed to the spirits around her and the way that they become accustomed to her. And at the end of it, they're all waving her goodbye. We'll miss you. And in a way, she has become attached to this spirit world that she was so scared of at first. I'm going to give it a 12. I think it's a great story arc. I think there's a lot to take away from the film, even if there's not one specific lesson to be learned. It's just a story that's told beautifully. And the development that takes place with the relationships between the characters and the way that each character, as I stated earlier, each spirit is really given their own personality is just beautiful.
And I agree with you there. I also gave it a 12. Just because, like you said, like I feel like with us watching all of these movies that have so much to pack in, I feel like we're kind of like reaching out and looking for more story elements where
Sure.
sometimes all you need is just a basic story of just my parents turned into pigs and I need to turn them back into humans.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's all these kooky little characters that each get their own kind of character arc that truly make this such an enjoyable watch, and it's a fun watch.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we've watched a lot of movies that have ranged from, you know, very emotional, very heavy to where now we get, I mean, it's Japanese Disney, and it's easy, it's pretty simple to get through, and it's like you said, it's a simple story told in a very beautiful way
And a complex way. While the story itself is fairly simple, there's still a lot of complexities in this film. A lot of magic that is not overtly explained to you, which I appreciate that they don't feel the need to hold your hand throughout it. Things kind of happen because that's the way that they are, and that's okay.
A lot of things that you just kind of accept.
This is the world we're living in this moment. Exactly. So
how
obviously
her bird companion looks exactly like her, and that she can also turn into this bird companion, Yubaba, which also confused me as a child. And I'm like, wait, but she's over there, but now she's turning into that bird thing. But I mean, you just kind of accept it for what it is. And
so this movie has had a very strong impression on the world of pop culture, and is this considered an anime, would you say? I don't know.
I mean, it literally said it like on the Wikipedia page of like, this was like the first non-English and anime to win best animated feature.
Sure. So
because a manga is like the comic book, anime is animated version of said manga. But I mean,
regardless, it's had its impact on pop culture. But I'd never seen the movie before, and I was familiar with the visual aspect of the no-face spirit. I had seen pictures of Yubaba, and it's made its impression on the world at large. What is its lasting impression on your rating scale? How do you feel about it in terms of the weight that you're going to carry moving forward?
So again, like this all just kind of goes back to like my personal history, like with Studio Ghibli. While this is the most one of the most popular Studio Ghibli films, there are others that I'd say this is the more critically acclaimed of the popular Ghibli films. Like you have like Ponyo, you have My Neighbor Totoro, you have Howl's Moving Castle, you have Kiki's Delivery Service, but this is like the more I'd say like this is the one that like the critics would say is like the best in their opinion, and it certainly has left that impression. I feel like this is an introductory to Ghibli for a lot of different people.
Hmm.
But for my personal lasting impression, while I can respect what this movie did, not only just for Studio Ghibli, but just for Japanese animation for a lot of people, I would give it a 13 out of 15 just for my personal lasting impression. Like I know that, like to your point, this movie is a pop culture phenomenon. This movie has a freaking musical playing at the West End in London right now.
Really?
Yeah, or like I don't know if it's a musical or if it's a stage adaptation, but I mean it is now being told in different mediums this story. But
Hmm.
for my
That would
personal
certainly be
lasting
something,
impression,
a sight to behold, a
oh
stage
yeah,
production of
I
this
mean
play.
a
I
a
mean, of this
a
movie.
live action Radish Demon is all you need to see, dude. It's crazy. But at least from
Interesting.
my lasting impression, I give it a 13 out of 15.
Okay, I'd give it a 12 out of 15. I think if I were younger when I first watched this movie, it really would have left a mark on me, probably for worse as opposed to better, because it would have scarred me. But there's still a lot to take away from this film. It's something that I am going to think about because there was a lot to unpack here, even if it was, like we said, a very, hesitate to say simple, but a very straightforward storyline at the end of the day. There's still so much to unpack. There's still so much to learn and so much to think about when it comes to the different spirits that are portrayed in this film. I think that I would carry it with me. I think it's something I'd recommend to other people. And of course, it's had its massive impact on the world of animated films and pop culture and the characters. So I think I'm comfortable there at a 12. I don't think that there's anything really profound that's going to weigh on my brain, but there's still a lot that I take away and carry with me. I think I will continue to carry with me from this film. So I'm sitting pretty there at a 12. 10.
Same. I'm like that, and I feel like that's going to be me moving forward with
For
Ghibli
those
films.
listening
I
on
mean,
podcast, I'm saying 10 for the visual and auditory appeal because this movie is a spectacle to look at.
so
And
am
the
I.
music's
I
great
mean,
too.
like to a point that you made a little while ago where you tend to lean more towards like live action versus animation. I feel like I'm the complete opposite. If I have an opportunity to watch an animated version of a film versus live action, I'm leaning heavily towards animated. I There's just so much more that you can explore with animation, and I feel like it's movies like this that truly like expand the scope of what you can do in an animated film and how you can do it in a tasteful and very artistic way. And I
Mhm.
feel moving forward, like a lot of Ghibli films, I feel especially like Princess Mononoke and Grave of the Fireflies, they're going to scratch that itch for me that put that in a 10 spot for me. But we'll
Yeah,
see
and
where it goes from there. I don't want to, jump the gun on that, but I feel like in terms of Ghibli, in terms of the animated films that are on this list, Ghibli sets such a high mark for animation that I feel comfortable giving that a 10.
yeah, and it's a very unique animation style too. The fact that it's hand-drawn
Mhm,
animation for the most part, there is some CGI animation, I guess you could
mhm.
call in spots. However, it all blends seamlessly and it all looks spectacular on screen.
And
Um,
it's a
it's
Miyazaki film immediately. Miyazaki he has a very signature style for his
Mhm.
animations that like you can look at something like this and know immediately that like this is a Miyazaki film for sure.
But not only the visual aspect, as you stated earlier, it has the score to back it up, and that's what you need to get a 10 in this category, for me at least, to have that music accompanying the beautiful things that you're seeing on screen, even when they're fairly simple, like her eating a rice cake, right?
It
still has that
literally
impact
mess
on
you up,
right? So yeah, easy category there. I think animated films may in general have an edge because they don't need to rely on practicality. You know, it's simply drawing and animation. So you can really create these visual spectacles that would be incredibly hard to pull off in live action. When you take Spider-Verse, for example, not to get so ahead of ourselves here, because it's also on the list. I've seen it before. That movie's also a 10 in the visual and auditory appeal for me. And they're so different in nature of their animation. They're both so distinct, but they still both have that pop and that wow factor where you just can't believe your eyes sometimes. So
it falls into its own category for animation, like Spider-Verse, like this. Like it's not just a 3D animated film that you're kind of confused of, like, is this Disney? Is this Pixar? What is this? Like, even though they're both the same, like every movie tends to sort of feel like that now, but it's movies like Spirited Away, it's movies like Into the Spider-Verse that push the boundary and start a new trend for animation going forward.
Exactly. Yep.
And again, just like shout out to Miyazaki and Hisaishi that they're just a combo going forward into these other like Miyazaki films or Ghibli films that we have that are just going to hit you with that 1-2 punch and just kind of make it just like a unanimous 10 when it comes to visual and auditory appeal.
How did this movie pace out for you? What did you think about the pacing?
So the pacing, it paced out very well. I give it a 9 out of 10. I feel that, like, to your point, like how you said that this was very vignette style, that, there's some moments that kind of like take you out of the base story element of, Chihiro trying to get her parents to turn back into humans, but they pay off in the end. Like the river monster scene, like watching it again, I was like, okay, like I know about this scene, it's fun, but what does it have to do with the overall story? But it teaches you how the bathhouse operates, which then leads into the No Face storyline.
That's also how she gets the medicine, is from the river spirit. So it still served its purpose on the whole.
It did. But then just, going into it, like I would say like it's I'm comfortable leaving it at a 9, just because I would say like, yeah, the river monster scene tends to be a little bit longer, but that might also just because the river monster is extremely slow getting into the bathhouse. But
I loved it. I also give it a 9 here. With that river spirit scene, though, I found it really intriguing because Yubaba is saying someone is sneaking in. You don't know if it's the river monster, if she's talking about Chihiro, or if she's talking about No Face. And there's that element of suspense again, where you don't know who it is that's sneaking in and for what purpose. It didn't really feel as though there was any scene that was wasted per se. However, there were definitely some, very few, but some scenes where it lulled just a little bit. Mainly, I think, with the character of Bo, the big baby. Some of it, a little bit, just took it off track very slightly, enough for me to bump it down from a 10. But as I said earlier, the movie dives right into it and keeps its pace up pretty much the entire time through the end. And you're entertained the entire time, and every scene felt necessary. Almost every scene felt necessary. So feel good about it being there at a 9, almost a perfect score.
What do you think of the acting?
This is tough.
This is our first animated, so it is difficult. I would say this is going to be very interesting to score because this is the first voice acting.
Right. So you really are only judging it off the voice acting, and not only that, the voice acting is in a language that I don't know. So I'm not accustomed to where certain inflection points are. So I'm going to give it an 8, not because I thought that there was anything wrong with it, just because I don't feel as though I'm able to appreciate the acting as much as I would in a movie such as Sunset Boulevard, for example, or Lawrence of Arabia, or Scenes from a Marriage, where you are seeing the characters and the actors specifically internalize their thoughts and internalize their beliefs. You're only hearing their voices, and I'm only hearing their voices in a language that I'm not familiar with. So it felt fine, but I feel as though there's a certain ceiling that a movie such as this has when it comes to how much I can appreciate the acting behind it. I thought everyone in the original language did a fine job, but it's impossible for me to put it up there in the ranks of movies like Scenes from a Marriage, where you're watching these actors go through trauma essentially as these characters. So an 8, because it's essentially the highest that I could give a film like this in the way that I watched it. So no knock on the movie there. It's just simply it has a certain ceiling that's going to be very hard to break through when it comes to movies like this.
So this is where it gets interesting.
Right, because you watched
because
the dub.
of correct. So this is where I'm trying to think of like when is this going to become kind of like this jarring issue? And it's here because I also gave it an 8. But obviously for different reasons. Obviously, I watched this movie in English. Everybody played their part very well. And I will hark it back to Davy Chase's yelling, hooting, and hollering that really brought it down for me when she's screaming. That might have gotten it down for me. But again, she also plays the rest of the movie when she's not yelling and screaming very well. But then there are also some instances. So Suzanne Pleshette, veteran actor of the screen. So it's towards the end of her life. And she's playing this part of Yubaba and Zaniba. But there are some instances when she is playing it that it's kind of phoned in. And there are other Ghibli films, which I'll again say Howl's Moving Castle. Billy Crystal has a role in the film, a very predominant role in the film, where you could tell that Billy Crystal either isn't given necessary direction for the role that he's supposed to be playing, or he's phoning it in, which I'm hoping it's the latter, because later that year or earlier, he did Monsters Inc. He played Mike Wazowski and did very well. But then you get a couple years later, you get Howl's Moving Castle, and it's like he is literally he's getting a paycheck. He's spitting some lines and then getting out of the studio. But it's just a nice comparison to see like how these dubs are done through Disney. And they will range from very good performances, like with Jason Marsden as Haku, plays very well. Like obviously you hear it and you're like, oh, that's Goofy's son Max, but he's able to kind of warp his voice into a way, or kind of change his inflection and his tone to give Haku his own voice, even though you know it's coming out of Jason Marsden. So just from like that aspect alone, it's incredible. And I mean, even the baby is played by Tara Strong, who is in literally everything animated. Like she's Timmy Turner from The Fairly Odd Parents. She plays Dill from the Rugrats. Like she's in a lot of shit. But then I couldn't even tell that was Tara Strong, because she can change her voice in a way, because she's such a veteran voice actress, that she can do those things. So in those aspects is why I give it an 8, because of how these veteran voice actors are able to change their ways to make their voices sound fresh. It's just Davy Chase and Suzanne Pleshette brought the score down just a little bit, but overall the voice acting was amazing. Suspension of disbelief, I give it a 9 out of 10. I mean, there wasn't really any story elements or certain aspects of the movie that like took me out of it. But I'm still kind of trying to figure out, there's one story element where I'm like, how did she know that? It's towards the end when she's just about to leave the spirit world, but Yubaba's like, I have one more challenge for you, and if you lose, you have to stay in this world forever. And it's when she's choosing the pigs to see which one is her parents. And we kind of get all of these shots, and she's like, well, none of these are my parents. I'm like, but how? When like earlier on, like couldn't really even tell which pigs were your parents. But I'd say it's a very minor aspect to
It felt
make you
kind of
not.
unnecessary. I appreciated what it was going for. It felt a little unnecessary.
Yeah,
She's
but
she's
I mean,
already
that's
done the shit you asked.
correct. Like it was kind of like it's one more like fuck you kid to this beautiful story, which I was like, yeah, was this really necessary? But also when she's doing it, like how did she even know? But I mean, you could think of that as like, oh, she's looking into these pigs' eyes and doesn't see the eyes of her parents. I'm like, oh, all right. But I mean,
Sure.
again, a 9 is still a very high score for suspension of disbelief.
I'm gonna give it an 8, and this is always a hard category to really explain. It's kind of more just something that you feel, in my opinion. How much were you? Because I was very immersed. I was very immersed in this film. But when I have to think about the script and I have to think about justifications that aren't provided, that's where I will knock it down a little bit. For me, my main thing was humans are such an anomaly in this spirit world, but there's so many humans that are there. And the movie doesn't really dive into whether or not they are spirits that are taking on the form of humans, whether they are humans that were lost. And if so, if they were humans that were lost, why is it such an anomaly that Chihiro is now here with her parents? And also, just simply stumbling upon this, if humans are to be banished, it seemed like it was mighty easy to happen across. I can't hold it against the movie on the whole. I don't think that it ruins it by any means. And
No.
I was incredibly immersed in the film for almost the entirety of the runtime. I just am feeling an 8 here. I'm feeling an 8 because of those small little nitpicks, and I have to be an asshole sometimes, I guess, but I think that this is where I'll knock it down. And only 2 points. 8 is still pretty good. The script did not feel lazy. It just felt like maybe there was some stuff that wasn't fully explained, and if it were explained, maybe it would have been too boring. I'm not sure the
Yeah,
justification
you
there,
don't want
but
it spoon fed to you, but at least
right,
skip a little season of like, yeah,
right.
Lynn is here. She's clear, like from what our basis is, like
And
she's
and
clearly a
maybe
human being.
And maybe there's hints that I didn't pick up on, so I'm gonna have to go back and rewatch, and maybe the score will change with time. But after my first watch, how I'm feeling now, I give it an 8 out of 10 there on the suspension of disbelief.
Yeah.
But that's countered with another perfect score in the category of originality because
Yep, and I agree with you
yeah,
there.
Miyazaki creates these characters. Some of them, yes, are inspired by yokai spirits, or some of the inspiration is clearly drawn from the Shinto religion, but it's made its own, and it's so well thought out and so detailed. And I keep going back to the fact that not only are the characters visually very unique and original, but they all have their own personality that matches their appearance and matches the reason that they're in the spiritual world, and they're all fleshed out very well. And it's just such a unique concept and not something that we really see every day. There's nothing quite like Spirited Away that I would say I've seen. It's very, very very much its own thing. And again, I haven't seen other Ghibli films, so maybe if I had, I would be comparing it to other Ghibli films to see how much it sets apart itself from the movies from the same studio, right?
Yeah, but
But I
I mean,
haven't.
for someone who
And
has seen like other Ghibli films, like I also gave it a 10 just because even just kind of comparing, Ponyo is Studio Ghibli's Little Mermaid. Like it's pretty much like I wouldn't give Ponyo a 10 out of 10 because while it does that story in an original way, it's not an original story, if that makes any sense. Like
of course, yeah.
but this one, you can't pinpoint anything. Like it's not like it's based on a novel by so and so. Like this is an original. This is an original idea and a peek into the brain of one of the greatest minds in not only Japanese animation but in animation entirely. And it has stuck with a lot of people for a very good reason. And it's a pop culture phenomenon. Like these characters, like Chihiro, well, specifically No Face, has transcended its own art and its own medium in a way that is very original.
Hmm.
Whereas there's other There's other Ghibli films that I would probably give a 10 out of 10 to, but I'll stop talking about Howl's Moving Castle for the sake of Parker's own sanity. But
I
there
haven't seen
are
it.
you should, but again, there's other Ghibli films that I would give 10s to.
Right.
And
as long
this
as they
one
set themselves
specifically,
apart from the movies that they often would be compared to. So for me, I don't have that context. It's easier for me to give it a 10 because it truly is its own thing. And I know that Miyazaki, I'm saying his name right?
Yes.
I know that Miyazaki created these characters. He and his team created these characters organically. I looked, and some of them are simply not really based directly off of anything. They're his own brainchild, which is just incredible because there's so much detail and so much personality given to all of the spirits in this film. And it's great. It's great. Very original, and it's refreshing to see.
In terms of that, for my attachment, I give it a 4 out of 5. Again, this movie has stuck with me for a very big portion of my life. I've seen it multiple times. I enjoy it very much. The score is amazing. The story, the animation is just unlike anything I've ever seen. I love animated movies, and this is among one of my top favorites. It's not my favorite Ghibli film, but it is a very good Ghibli film for sure.
I give it a 3. And that's just how I feel about it. I give it a 3 out of 5 because that's about how attached I feel to this. There's really not much further to go into on it. But yeah, 3 out of 5 there, which puts it for me right at an 85, which is the cusp for a movie of 4.5 stars in terms of this rating system, which feels right. I think I would actually err more on the side of 4 stars than 4.5 if I were to just look at it and give it stars. But lo and behold, here we are at a score of 85 for me, a score of 89 for yourself, which I believe is going to put this movie far and away in the number 1 spot for us. Is that correct?
It does, yeah. So let's go ahead and put that there. So Spirited Away has ran away with the number 1 spot on our list, putting it for finally, it's not a tie. Thank God.
I know.
I was
And
getting
this
that
is
was
only
really
our second movie that has averaged out to a score above 80. The only other one being High and Low, which is currently sitting at our number 2 spot.
Another Japanese film.
Well, a lot of these have been foreign language. We really only have 1 English film out of the first 10 because Sherlock Jr. is a silent film.
Yeah, it's
We
just
really only
Sunset
have
Boulevard.
Sunset Boulevard. So before we dive into the wheel, because we're at 10 for our audio only listeners, I'm going to walk through our top 10 here quickly. At number 10, we have The Human Condition, No Greater Love, with an average score of 61.5. Number 9, Sherlock Jr., the 1924 silent film, with a score of 71. At number 8, the first movie that we watched, Sunset Boulevard, with an average score of 74. Number 7, A Separation, an Iranian marriage story, with an average score of 75.5. Number 6, last episode's Love Exposure, with an average score of 76.5. At number 5, Fanny and Alexander, also with an average score of 76.5. Number 4,
which we noted was more watchable than Love Exposure, so that's why we put it above Love Exposure.
At number 4, back-to-back Bergman films with Scenes from a Marriage, with an average score of 79. Number 3, Lawrence of Arabia, also with an average score of 79. Number 2, High and Low, with an average score of 83. And of course, at number 1 now, Spirited Away, with a massive average score of 87. So great to have a top 10 list in front of us. I'm excited to see if our number 11 film is going to break the top 10. I think it will. I have an idea that The Human Condition is going to remain probably fairly low on our list when all is said and done. But let's freaking do it, man. Bring us into our 11th film. Bring that bad boy up. Let's spin the damn wheel.
It's my favorite time of the week, as always, dude. So, again, as always, we have put Spirited Away up in the rafters. We are ready to spin. We are now at 90 films left here. So, like Parker said, we have chunked 10% of this list off. So, it is time to spin the wheel and see what we are going to be watching next? Are you ready, buddy?
Oh, I'm ready. Let's do it.
Let's do it. Let's see. Oh. All right. What is this?
Wild Strawberries. Okay, I've never heard of this film.
I saw it go past Inglourious Bastards, and I was like, "Oh my
Ingmar
god, no way!"
Bergman again, our third Bergman film.
No way.
Yes, dude, the wheel loves Ingmar Bergman, bro. The wheel loves Ingmar Bergman.
And for those
So-
viewers, you know who also loves Ingmar Bergman?
This
Is our
guy.
boy Parker Patchett.
So we'll see. As you're pulling it up, I can let you know that Wild Strawberries has a 4.3 average score on Letterboxd and is actually no longer in the top 100. So at the time of us creating this list, it was what number, Felix, if you go back to the wheel?
90. It was at 97.
Sure. So when we created this list, it was at 97. It's now at number 104. We're going to watch it regardless because, of course, this was a snapshot. And then I think what we can do, Felix, is once all is said and done and we've watched our 100, we can go in and we can watch the films that have made it into this list since we've started. I think that would maybe be an exciting experiment to keep this going. But Wild Strawberries, as I mentioned, is directed by Ingmar Bergman, came out in 1957. The Letterboxd synopsis that we have here: crotchety retired doctor Isaac Borg travels from Stockholm to Lund, Sweden, with his pregnant and unhappy daughter-in-law, Marianne, in order to receive an honorary degree from his alma mater. Along the way, they encounter a series of hitchhikers, each of whom causes the elderly doctor to muse upon the pleasures and failures of his own life. These include the vivacious young Sarah, a dead ringer for the doctor's own first love. I'm excited to get into this. I think Bergman has a way of making movies that just appeals to me. And this sounds like a pretty interesting synopsis that's entirely different from Fanny and Alexander and from Scenes from a Marriage. So I like that though it's the same director, we're getting a little bit of diversity. For me, because I did not watch the dub, this is going to be, I think, my 8th straight foreign language film in a row. And we have a runtime here of only 91 minutes, which is very different from the other Bergman films that we've watched. So
yeah, that have been clocking it at 3 hours each time. But
right,
I'm excited. I mean, after just like doing this podcast and listening to us talk about Fanny and Alexander and Scenes from a Marriage, I'm also excited. I mean, I've grown to love Bergman. I mean, I know I had my initial opinions about Fanny and Alexander when we first watched them, but I've grown to love Bergman's filmography. The last 2 films that we have seen, I've grown to love and cherish, not only for watching it for this podcast, but it's just been, he has a very distinct way of storytelling that I'm excited to see in Wild Strawberries.
Yep.
It's going to be a good time.
Yep. Fanny and Alexander and Scenes from a Marriage were 2 vastly, vastly different films. So
let's just see if it's going to get grouped together with the 2 of them, which was funny. Right. I didn't know that they were right next to each other on the list. So we will see where it will rank up. But as always, Parker, this is one of the more fun things that I enjoy every week. I know I was on vacation, but I knew like once I get back, we had to get back in the stew and hit the ground running with Spirited Away and just keep this thing going. So where can people find you?
Yes, absolutely. You can find us on Letterboxd at LetterBros, of course, and you can find me on Letterboxd at Parker_Paget. Just saw The Substance, just saw Blink twice. Been trying to hit the theater as much as possible. So if you want to stay up to date with my thoughts on the current movieverse, then go ahead and drop a follow on there. What about you, Felix?
You can find me on Letterboxd at ETZIO911. I was on a lot of planes during this vacation, so I had a lot of opportunities to watch a bunch of movies, newer, older, spooky movies since it's the season. I just came back from the studio tour at Warner Brothers for Harry Potter, which was very fun. So I've been kind of on a binge of Harry Potter and kind of giving it the formal review, kind of going through which ones are my favorites out of the series. But I mean, you can continue to follow me on there. You can also follow LetterBros Pod on Instagram and TikTok for more of those mini reviews that we've been doing and just more reels from the show and just, for further information, just follow us there. But Any final thoughts, Parker?
Always a pleasure, man. It's a good time.
Oh, and also make sure, first of all, make sure to review this podcast 5 stars, and give reviews, please, so that way we can know what we're doing right and what we're doing wrong. And also, because it's the season, make sure to please go listen to the Spooky Senders podcast.
It won't be the season when this episode airs, but yes.
Yeah, no, but just listen to it anyway. Like, even when you want to,
we'll have a full
just
review
think about...
of Halloween Horror Nights Hollywood and Halloween Horror Nights Orlando. Probably releasing around this time that this episode does. So it may be out by the time that you're hearing this now. So go check it out. My friend Colin and I love to just talk about the spooky season events that we look forward to every year. So yeah, thanks for the plug.
Of course, it's something that I genuinely listen to and I genuinely enjoy, even when it's not HHN season. They clearly love what they're talking about, and it makes for very good conversations. So go listen to that. But until then, we will see you at the movie. Kick ass.